Gather back together, I just wanted to say this conversation that's happening is one that I've always thought should happen more and more inside congregations. You know, that just to be able to be attentive to different traditions and different ways of viewing the world. And one of the ways that we try to do that here at Our Savior's is with a thing we call intentional community. And some of you are a part of that, where we try to bring people together to kind of share out from their own personal spiritual experience in an honest way, so that we can both learn from each other as we strive to foster a deeper spiritual connection with the Holy. And so intentional community has been a part of this kind of the life of this parish for a number of years, and a number of you are in it and are trying it out. So we're going to shift to, I'm going to let you guys kind of self-regulate this a little bit, since they have the questions in front of them. We're going to give them about 10 more minutes to kind of wrestle with these the questions that are here. And I must say that you all wrote really wonderful ones. I wish we could handle them all. We won't be able to have them all, but at least some of them. All right? Can you guys kind of manage this section? You all right?
Sure. I've got one here that I actually quite like a lot. It says, do you believe that Jesus was the Son of God? And I would say that from the perspective of my tradition, my training, I would go in the direction of who is not the daughter of God or the Son of God. We are all from the infinite, and therefore the infinite is an extension outwardly and internally. Therefore the distinctions that we put in place are mind created. And those mind creations are exactly, when we cling to them, are exactly what begets non-peace. So, and this poses a really interesting dilemma, because when we start looking at reality that way, we start seeing that if God is infinite, God can't be separate from us. Therefore, praying to God externally is maybe one of the most deeply egoic things we could possibly do. Instead of talking to God, listen. And we can do that in meditation. Doesn't mean don't pray. I'm a huge fan of prayer. I think prayer is marvelous, because what does it do? It actually puts us in that space in the sacred. And that space in the sacred is where we can hear God, even if we're talking. So that's how, from my perspective, my tradition, we would.
Yeah, I'll just talk from mine, and then maybe a little quasi-Jungian. Do I believe Jesus was the Son of God? Yes. But don't make him carry it alone. And I don't think he wants to. And I think that we're all bearing that with him in a sense. You know, there's much more to it. I would ask the person, whoever asked the question, and we don't have time to explore it, but you know, there are implications and assumptions in the question. You know, is that a theological question? Is it a historical question? Are you talking about, is he, you know, ontologically divine, with the second member of the Trinity? You know, is this a theological, doctrinal sort of test question? Or are you asking me for a personal confession? There's lots of ways I could think about this question. But again, yes, but so are we.
Next one here that dovetails perfectly into your last comment. It says here, what would you see as the Trinity, or the equivalent of the Trinity in Buddhism and Jungian teachings? I'd say in Buddhism we could look at it in two ways. We could say either Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, okay? Or we could also look at it.
Can you unpack this before?
I sure will. Buddha is essentially, I think the best way to describe it in the most accessible way is Buddha is our highest self, our big self. Small self being ego, big self being that which can continually observe ego. Big self being a conscious manifestation of spirit. Small self being bound, you know, being at war, being defensive, things of that nature. Does this kind of make sense? And so Buddha is that big space, that spacious self. It also can mean teacher. Dharma means teaching, sacred teaching, wherever you're getting it from, whether it's Buddhist or some other tradition. And then Sangha is the group, And a sangha can be, I mean, I am a sangha of cells. I'm made up of cells, right? It's a community of cells. We are a community of beings here in this room. We are a community, a town, a city, a state, a country, a globe, a universe. Sangha extends infinitely in and out. Again, a manifestation of exactly the same thing we've been speaking about. So that Trinity shows up in a really kind of a cool way there. If you don't like that, I would say giver, receiver, and gift. Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. They really tend to support each other in that capacity.
I'm glad the question came up about the Trinity and Jung's approach to it, because he had such a novel and, in a sense, strange, but the more you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, notion. Because Jung said the Trinity was incomplete, and he felt it should be a quaternity. Jung was really into quaternities. Four, you know, the cross, four, the up, down, right, and left. And the fourth, really, the missing fourth in Christianity. Now we're talking about shadow, okay? What's in the shadow of Christianity? What's been repressed? What's been cut off and isolated? The feminine. And it's the divine feminine that needs to be re-recognized and readmitted, so to speak, into the Trinity. And so the fourth was, for him, not only the feminine, but the body, sexuality. This mundane plane, if you will. And then it goes into another question, and that is evil, because actually he would put the devil in there too. And isn't it interesting how in traditional lore, we have the woman as temptress. And that this is sort of obviously from a masculine and a paranoid masculine point of view, where the woman is somehow seen as someone who brings or tempts with evil. But what Jung is saying is, you know, the more we repress and cut off, and the further isolated that dimension of our whole self becomes, the more it takes on an autonomous and the more nature and the more demonized and the more absolute, in a sense, it becomes as evil. And so what he's saying is to redeem it, to find what is of value in it and to stop demonizing and pushing it away, to embrace it. And when you do, you find a wisdom. You find the feminine wisdom, which is missing in the Christian tradition. Relational wisdom, intuitive wisdom, feeling wisdom. And that's the missing fourth for Jung, so quaternity.
Well, that was a really good answer.
That's all I got. Wait, I'm done. That's it.
There's one here that asks, why do you believe the antithesis of the... I'm reading that.
Oh, you are?
Why do you believe the antithesis of peace, called fundamentalism, is becoming or has become so popular? I'm projecting here. I have no idea. You know, I'll just admit that. I really have no clue. But my sense is that when people start to fear, they go into that small self space. And small self or ego or mind orientation, or really just kind of clinging to things, creates certitude. And certitude is the birth of war, really. When you are absolutely 100% positively sure of something, now you're ready to defend it. And when you're ready to defend it, it means you're waiting to withstand an attack. And you're also ready to counterattack. So fundamentalism shows up whenever we are in that space of defense. When we are in a non-defended space, we're fearless. And so as fearlessness can naturally begin to arise out of any of us who begin a meditation practice, as fearlessness begins to arise, we become extensions of, or agents of peace. When you have a tradition that posits you against somebody else, well, it says here, and here it says it's true, so therefore it is. This is the word of God, or the words of God, or whatever. When there's an entire cultural move in that direction because fear is arising, because threats are perceived as increasing, because chaos is seen as an enemy as opposed to a life force or an enrichment of life force, fundamentalism cannot help but show up. And for any of you to think that Buddhists can't be fundamentalists, travel. Okay? any tradition can have this as part of their living nightmare. And I actually think this is exactly the reason why the West has something to offer traditions and their reconfiguration, the reframing that you were kind of talking about. It's happening now. And we're all part of it. And hats off to both Randy and Dan for kind of participating in this kind of dialogue. You can't help but, one person at a time perhaps, undo the nightmare that could potentially take us down a really, really dark road.
I have a long experience in Christian fundamentalism, and it's disturbing to me, to be honest with you. I think, and this goes back to some of the things that were said earlier, there's an alarming lack, I guess I would call it anti-intellectualism in Christian fundamentalism. And I would urge not to be afraid of being of the critical, not to, how can I say this better? It is urgent that we approach our faith critically, and that we utilize the critical tools that scholarship has given us in the West. Our Muslim friends, I think, in some ways, need to go through that critical time where there's a complete reassessment of the entire basis of the story and the myth and the history. And in Christianity, we've done that to some extent, but there's this reactionary part where there is a refusal to look critically at our own history, at our own symbols, at our own story. And to me, the critical tools that we have can actually become a kind of purification of our tradition and can take it forward. I don't see it as a negative. I don't see it as destroying the tradition. I see it as moving the tradition into that essence that's most constructive and most beautiful about it, and removing that sort of toxicity and the idolatry that's set up, the bibliolatry. You know what I mean about bibliolatry? The
book
worship of the book, and moving beyond that. So I would urge, if we move into that critical phase completely, we'll move through it into a kind of second, what is called a second naivete, where we can approach the tradition in a simplicity, having done our work. We have to do our work first, otherwise it becomes an escape. And as Michael pointed out, the dynamics of that.
Got one here.
You got another one?
Yeah, it says, in focusing on is focusing on self-perfection a drawback, or should focus be on self-abnegation for others? Or wait, did I read that wrong? Basically about service or self. It sounds like what it's about, giving to others or actually perfecting ourselves. From the tradition of which I'm a part, I would say that there is no way you can do one without the other. If you are giving of yourself totally to any situation, to any person, to anything that might arise, you are actually enhancing and radically transforming the self that you think needs perfection. Quite frankly, you don't need perfection. You're perfect. You don't need to be healed. You're just fine. You're a divine manifestation of the infinite right now. What needs to be healed, what needs to be perfected, is your relationship to yourself. In doing so, everything else unfolds. And guess what spontaneously comes out of that type of meeting of oneself, that homecoming, spontaneously gives birth to service, giving, and vice versa. So that's what I'd say from my tradition.
Mm-hmm. Randy, do you have a comment on how that works?
I'm going to actually take another question. I'm going to steal one of his questions.
That's fine. I'm tired of standing, so I'm just going to sit here and comment from the floor.
I stole the question here. Michael, to what extent do you think the story of Buddha influenced the story of Jesus?
Do you want to sit here? Do you want to sit here and answer that?
No, I'll take it. It's entirely possible that there was some influence there. The history on it's very shaky. You're not going to get too much of a scholarly affirmation that that's true. There were some missionaries floating around that definitely moved in that direction. If you are interested in such things, look at a group called the Therapeutai. Look them up. It sort of sounds like therapy. The Therapists, Therapeutai, and you'll see what I'm talking about.